Louise Thrushwood was a modest, motherly mouse that lived within the walls of a quiet 2-story home. If anything could be considered loud in her home, it would be the bellies of her grandchildren, and as the family's food provider, it was her duty to keep them quiet. Each morning, before the sunrise, she would make her way to the house's kitchen to gather crumbs, drippings, and other scraps that had been carelessly left behind by the house's larger residents. This was the Thrushwood way, to take only what was left behind while no one was around to care. The most reward with the smallest risk. It allowed her and her family to live in the house without its residents being any the wiser, and she wouldn't hear any talk of her family being a bunch of thieves. As her father always used to tell her, it's not stealing if nobody wants it. Louise had never encountered any of the house's giants, but she knew that they were fond of midnight snacking and less fond of cleaning up after themselves. As a result, most of what Louise scavenged consisted of various cheeses, crackers, and cookies, which made up the majority of her family's diet. She would have liked if the housemasters snacked on some more fruits and veggies now and again, but scavengers couldn't be choosers. Wielding her father's sword, which had grown far too dull for combat, she would poke each crumb, inspect it, and place it in her basket if it passed her inspection. That morning, she happened upon something truly special in the midst of rounding up a scattering of cookie crumbs. One of the crumbs in question happened to contain a fully intact chocolate chip, the food of the gods. After sniffing it to confirm it wasn't just a raisin, she held it up to gaze at its shine in the sunlight. She so badly wanted to taste it. It had been months since anyone in her family had even smelled chocolate. But she had to restrain herself. Her father had always warned her about snacking while scavenging. One thoughtless bite could quickly lead to an empty basket, and Louise couldn't bear the thought of her family going hungry because of her. After depositing the final crumb into her basket, Louise sheathed her sword and immediately headed for home. She didn't want to risk sticking around once the housemasters woke up. The less time she spent outside her mouse hole, the better. The Thrushwood home was already full of life by the time Louise returned. The triplets were playing around on the couch. Sophia was hard at work putting her ribbons on everything, and Elizabeth was skulking in the corner practicing her evil stare. Louise's grandkids all threw out a warm welcome upon their grandmother's arrival, though Louise's own kids were a little preoccupied. Adam and Abigail were still sleeping like a rock and a log, respectively, acting as additional props for Sophia's decorations. Meanwhile, Morgan was already doing the prep work for breakfast. She was never one to take it easy. Louise wanted to keep the little surprise that she had found that morning a secret, especially from Morgan. It was difficult enough to convince her to feed her kids the cookie crumbs she scavenged, but Louise understood. It was Morgan's job as the mother to be a stick in the mud. But at the same time, Louise felt it was her duty as the grandmother to spoil her grandkids rotten. As long as she was the scavenger in the house, she'd make sure they got a little sugar in their diet. Louise did wonder how much longer that would be, though. More and more, Morgan had been hinting that Louise consider retiring her role as the family scavenger. Louise was already in her mid-50s, and her vision wasn't exactly as sharp as it used to be. Louise could see her point, but every time she thought about hanging up her cape, she'd remember the smiling faces of her little ones every morning she brought in a basket of goodies. It made her feel like she was doing her part, like she was a precious member of the family that couldn't be forgotten like her father was. She had a role to play, and she was the best to play it. Morgan, Adam, and Abigail had only scavenged a handful of times, and they still had a long way to go. Morgan was too cautious, and she couldn't find enough crumbs to fill her basket. Adam had a tendency to snack on the job, and Abby was too easily distracted by the wonders of the larger house. Louise wanted to see them improve, but she wasn't ready to let go of her title just yet. She knew that she had many more adventures left in her. As lively as the Thrushwood household could become, nothing turned it on quite like mealtime. No Thrushwood nose could resist the siren song of the dinner table, especially during breakfast when the crumbs were at their freshest. Even the most tasteless of saltines burst with flavour when placed on a plate with a sprinkle of grandmotherly love. unlike the patrons of the larger house, they would not leave one crumb behind. Dropped food would be eaten off the floor without hesitation. To do otherwise would be hypocritical. Louise had melted down the chocolate chip to use as a topping to the cheese, cracker and cookie crumbs she'd scavenged that morning. She'd played the role of the chocolate fairy, sprinkling a little touch of heaven into each of their plates. When it came to Morgan's kids, however, it didn't take much in the tank to get their engines running. Davy grabbed his ball from the living room to toss around. Sophia started biting her food face first like a wild animal, and Abigail suddenly found it difficult to resist teasing her twin brother. They were almost as energetic after eating it as they were just to see it. Even picky little Elizabeth had a chance of joining the clean plate club with chocolate on the table. Louise couldn't begin to measure her joy at seeing the table so alive. Morgan, on the other hand, was on full damage control, striving to quell the storm that was brewing as a result of combining her kids and sugar. She'd never understand why her mother enjoyed causing such chaos. As she attempted to wipe the chocolate off a jittering Sophia's face, Davy threw his ball a little too hard, knocking off Douglas's glasses and flying back into the living room. Dirk was naturally upset with this manoeuvre, as it was actually his ball, and he didn't like the looks of where it was flying. Morgan chastised Davy for playing around at the dinner table, failing to notice just where that ball was heading. The ball had rolled all the way from the dining room table, across the living room, and out toward the front door. Were the door shut, it would have harmlessly bounced off it. However, in the excitement of preparing her chocolate topping, Louise had forgotten to close the door behind her. Thus, there was nothing to stop the ball from rolling through the open door and into the untamed wilderness of the larger house. If there was one rule in the Thrushwood house, it was to never leave the safety of the mouse hole after sunrise for any reason. Under Morgan's rules, even looking outside of the mouse hole was grounds for a spanking. It was a rule for the adults as well as the children, though for the adults it was more of a strong suggestion. There was no telling what awaited them out there once the rest of the house was awake, and none of them were too keen on finding out. Even so, Dirk and Davy only had the one ball, and it wasn't as though there was a store around for them to buy another. If the larger residents found the ball and took it away, it would be gone forever. Louise volunteered to retrieve it, insisting there was no cause for concern. Their mouse hole had intentionally been dug out far away from any of the large furniture that could conceal predators, and the ball hadn't rolled too far out anyway. Louise was experienced enough to know what she could and couldn't get away with. She hung up her apron and strolled out to retrieve it with a casual, "Be right back," not even bothering to grab her sword or cape. Morgan was less optimistic about the idea. She wanted to tell her mother to stop, but Sophia, still high on her sugar rush, cut her off with the unrelenting demand to be read The Legend of Ice Cream again. In truth, Morgan didn't want her boys to lose their favourite toy either. She was just very partial to her grandfather's mantra of no unnecessary risks. At the very least, she wished her mother would put her cape on if she was going outside. She'd die of embarrassment if another mouse family saw her mother like that. Louise's plan of attack was simple. Walk outside, pick up the ball, run back inside. As long as nothing jumped out at her and pinned her to the wall, she was sure that there would be no issues. But there was something else. Something far more dangerous lurking in the outside world to prey on her. Not a predator, not a monster, but a smell. A smell that surpassed any she had ever experienced. The many years of scavenging had strengthened Louise with a fair amount of willpower. When out on the prowl for crumbs or serving her kids at the dinner table, she was pretty good at keeping her tongue in her mouth. But when it came to real food, the sort that was actually made to be eaten by someone, she was exposed for the glutton she truly was. Her nose had a mind of its own. At that moment, finding the source of the smell was all that mattered. All other thoughts were purged from her mind. She couldn't be shocked out of her mental state if her tail was shoved directly into an electrical socket. She had to know what it was. Following the smell with pinpoint accuracy, she made her way across the living room to the nearby door. The scent was coming straight through the vent that passed right across into the opposite room. In other words, It was coming from the kitchen. She couldn't map the scent to any food item she could name. Was it sour or sweet? Salty or spicy? She didn't know. But she had to know. The smell was too good to be true. She pushed her head through the large flap at the base of the door to see what mysteries awaited her. Louise was no stranger when it came to cats. She had seen lazy cats, mean cats, dumb cats, snooky cats, and even dog-like cats. Her strongest memory was at the old barn where she and her father once lived. There was one scrawny orange barn cat tasked to protect the silo from vermin. He was a pitiful creature, really, frightened off by a simple poke to the hindquarters with her father's sword. Over time, Louise's father managed to train him to fetch the leftovers from the farmer's table and save him the trouble of scavenging. Over time, Louise saw the cat as a friendly companion, like a big teddy bear that brought her food. The creature on the other side of that door flap, though, was no teddy bear. Its appearance was so striking that it knocked Louise out of her trance. The beast was covered from head to tail in a forest of thick fur. Much of the forest was coated in a bright brown, with white markings lighting up its cheeks, feet, belly, and tail tip. The white markings on its feet and tail were preceded by heavy patches of dark brown, resembling the broken shackles of an escaped prison convict. That same dark shade of brown formed long, jagged stripes that descended down her back and forehead, like scars obtained in the process of escaping said prison. Most intimidating of all, her side boasted a unique and unusual marking of the same dark colour in the shape of a foreboding skull. As the cat turned around, Louise could see the same marking miraculously adorn both sides, making the creature equally intimidating no matter which way it was facing. The cat's fur was certainly off-putting, but what really struck Louise was how massive the beast was in size. While the vast amount of fluff obscured the creature's true size, this was definitely one fat cat. It made her old barn cat friend look like a large rat by comparison. Louise couldn't believe she had been living in the same house as something so enormous without knowing about it. In hindsight, she was feeling awfully glad that her family avoided the house's larger patrons. After taking in the sights, Louise's thoughts turned back to the smell. The cat was rather unceremoniously lapping up a bowl of milk on the kitchen floor. It was a familiar sight for Louise. The barn cat did it all the time. But where was that smell coming from? The aroma certainly wasn't coming from mere milk, and there didn't seem to be anyone else in the kitchen. But Louise's nose didn't lie. This was definitely the room it was coming from. Just then, Louise heard a loud ding. She instinctively ducked down, thinking the cat had noticed her or Morgan had come to drag her home. In actuality, it averted the cat's attention even further away from Louise. Louise watched intently as the cat made its way over to one of the large kitchen boxes she had always found too risky to mess with during her scavenging. After responding to the ding, the cat returned to its milk bowl, and Louise became privy to the answers of two of her questions. Where was the smell coming from? And how was this cat so fat? It seemed a little strange to see a cat with a milk bowl without a food bowl to go with it. The cat returned not with one food bowl, but with 5. Each one contained a gloriously fattening dish beyond anything Louise's taste buds had encountered. If she couldn't smell it herself, she'd never believe it. Soft swirl ice cream sandwiched between 2 donuts, boiled shrimp coated in chocolate, a burrito stuffed with cheese fries and layered with honey, and one of the bowls looked to just contain a jar of mayonnaise with an ice cream cone stuck to its lid by way of caramel. The cat certainly had peculiar tastes. But Louise wasn't one to talk. Each bowl sent more and more saliva pouring out of her mouth until she finally caught herself and scooped her tongue off the floor. She knew she had to resist her burning desire to leap into the nearest bowl and join the cat in its feeding frenzy, but the food wasn't helping her sense of duty. The bright blue bowl closest to Louise had a ham, cheese, and marshmallow sandwich in it that was practically begging her to eat it. The raw fish in between the 2 bread slices was practically looking at her. She could hear it calling her name. Just one bite. Morgan and the cat will never know. Louise couldn't do it. She had to turn away. If the twin skulls on the cat's sides were good for anything, it was dissuading Louise from risking getting up close and personal with them. The last thing Louise wanted for was this creature to find out there were mice in the house. Wrestling herself free of the tantalizing odours and colours, Louise pulled her head back through the door and steeled herself to return home. The image of the cat eating was burned into her mind as she headed back, including one little detail that stood out to her. Louise had encountered those bowls before in an empty state. Each one was emblazoned with a single word must have identified its owner. Ambrosia. Louise's foray into the unknown had not gone unnoticed. While she had felt helpless to do anything as her mother brazenly wandered beyond any conceivable realm of safety, Morgan was all too eager to read her mother the riot act upon her return. Slamming the door to their home shut and locking it tightly, Morgan shoved her mother back into the dining room. Louise's feet dragged along the dirt floor in apprehension. Louise didn't make any excuses. She knew what she did was wrong. She knew Morgan's anger was justified. She had let her love of food take over and put an unnecessary risk on the family's head. This was not the Thrushwood way. What would her father think if he were here to see this? Louise didn't dare mention the sights she had seen, as she knew even hinting there was a cat in the house would send Morgan to the ceiling. She could still remember all the times Morgan would crawl into her bed at night, crying that she saw a cat tail outside her window. They had lived in a hollow log back then, and it took forever to convince Morgan that it was just a cat tail. But this time the cat tail was very real, and like the rest of the cat, it was bigger and fatter than even Louise had ever seen. Louise wasn't about to tell Morgan how close she had come to revealing herself to it, though it didn't seem like she could make things much worse for herself. Morgan insisted that if Louise was going to act like a child, then she would be treated like one. From that day forward, Louise was to follow all of the same rules as Morgan's children. No leaving the mouse hole or even looking outside of it under any circumstances. Naturally, this meant her scavenging days were officially over. Louise wanted to protest, but she had nothing to counter with. What she had done was reckless. What if she encountered such a delicious smell while scavenging? Would she be able to control herself then? It wasn't as though Morgan, Adam, and Abigail couldn't perform the job. It would probably be better in the long run for them to start getting that experience. Louise just wished her time didn't have to end so abruptly. Louise meekly accepted her daughter's punishment in silence. Though her sadness was overtaking her, it lessened as she handed Dirk his ball, watching the smile on his face as he scampered off to play with it. She wanted to keep feeling it, that feeling of providing for her family, that feeling of being useful. Whether she was a scavenger or not, she wanted to keep that feeling alive, even if she had to fight off 100 cats to make it happen. The following morning, Louise rose before the roosters crow to carry out her scavenger duties as normal, only realizing when she got to the front door that it was her first day of forced retirement. Morgan had modified the sign on the front door to say no children or old ladies beyond this point. Louise got the message, but she felt a bit slighted. She wasn't an old lady yet, so clearly this sign didn't apply to her. She looked back to confirm her kids were still snugly tucked in bed. Then she impishly pushed open the door and stuck one foot out, as if to stick a finger in the sign's eye. As she did, she suddenly felt glad that her kids had overslept. The gigantic cat that Louise had encountered the day before was suddenly before her, napping in the centre of the living room right next to the kitchen door. What was the beast doing here? Why now of all times? Louise had never encountered it before yesterday. Had it detected her? Had Louise given away that there were mice in the living room? Was it her drool? While all of these questions buzzed through her mind, they were all eclipsed by the second unusually large object in the room. A well-sized slice of cake, at least 3 times as big as Louise's whole body. It was resting on a plate, uneaten, right in front of the snoozing cat. Louise didn't know what to make of such a sight. Did the cat originally have the entire cake and fall asleep after eating all but one slice? Did someone set the cake down as a treat for the cat after it woke up? Was this cat perhaps so pampered that it coughed up cake slices instead of hairballs? In any case, it was clear that this cake was off limits. She knew her father's words all too well. Scavengers only took what was unwanted. Anything more was stealing. It didn't matter how much her tongue was screaming for satisfaction. It didn't matter how much it looked like that cat could sleep through construction work in a thunderstorm. It didn't matter how much untold joy her grandkids would experience receiving even a single lick of that frosting. There was simply no way she could run out and take a piece of that cake, even if it was within the safety zone. It was unthinkable. Yep, completely out of the question. Before Louise knew it, she was standing beside the cake, her heart pounding from her chest so loudly she was afraid it would wake the cat. She couldn't remember how she got there, or even when she put on her cape. Her nose had staged a mutiny and had taken control of her feet. Not that she realized such a thing at the time. It was too rational for her state of mind. Her mind was on the cake, the delicious, all-important cake. Her eyes were practically turning pink to match its glossy glow as she shambled towards it like a zombie. How much could she take? Was it better to go for the front or the back? Could she dare make 2 trips? Should she use her cheeks like a squirrel to carry as much as possible? Would it still be edible if she did? All of these fleeting thoughts eventually gave way to one word. Strawberry. Without skipping a beat, she thoughtlessly clambered onto the cake slice and seized the crown jewel resting on top of it, twirled around and sprinted back to safety, out of the snoozing behemoth's long reach. At least that's how it went in her head. In reality, her legs had become nothing more than wheels spinning in the mud. They were moving quickly, but her body wasn't going, and there was a suspiciously heavy weight now resting on her tail that even her cake-addled brain couldn't ignore. Louise suddenly understood the feeling her daughter had felt when fearfully climbing into her parents' covers all those years ago. With thoughts of frosting and happiness forcefully ejected from her mind, all now she could dream about was the thought of her dad petting her head and comforting her with the revelation that it was only